So it is a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Olya from Sheffield University. Dr. Olya is very well known on using application of fsQCA in management and marketing studies. He has been using this approach for last couple of years. Is a good friend of mine and also has a very good knowledge on publishing in different journals, both in management and marketing areas. I have been working with him for the last couple of years as well. It's quite fun working with him, which is very important for me when I work with people. So the stage is yours, Hussein, and I shut up and mute myself.
Thank you, Babak, for invitation. It's a great pleasure to talk about configurational theory and asymmetrical modeling using fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis. And it's always important to know new approach, new method, specifically for PGRs and also for researchers, because the expectations of the publication is increasing. And I tried to cover, in next 2 hours, to cover 7 items in my presentation. I will have introduction of the qualitative comparative analysis, QCA. I will compare the traditional approach, or sometimes we call it as a symmetrical approach, including regression analysis, structural equation modeling, PLSSEM, correlation analysis. This all, we call it as a traditional approach of the modeling with fsQCA and necessity analysis. Then you would have an idea why we need this method along with the traditional approach. I will explain why we need specifically fsQCA, what are the theoretical motivations by using fsQCA, in other words, how we can contribute to the current knowledge in terms of the theoretical contribution if we use fsQCA in our research. Because there are some researchers that they believe that fsQCA is not just a method, it's not just an analytical tool, it could generate new knowledge. And in my presentation, I'm going to explain why they believe that fsQCA is not just an analytical approach. It also addresses a number of the methodological concerns, specifically in relation to the traditional approach. I will explain 4 methodological advantages of the fsQCA. Then I will talk about the softwares that you can use to run this analysis. And at the end, we will talk about the limitations. Of course, every method, although they are powerful, they have their own limitation and disadvantages that we are going to discuss today. In terms of the introduction, many of the people have difficulties to pronounce fsQCA. That's why I decided to start with the introduction, which is fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis. And you see the term of qualitative in the name of this analysis. And this is quite interesting because you are going to use quantitative data, but you would have some sort of qualitative output. And that makes this analysis more interesting because it's a kind of a bridge between qualitative and comparative analysis. And in our research, when we want to interpret the results, we say that results that fsQCA provide or explore some recipes, some models. So you know that the terms of the exploration usually used in qualitative analysis. It's not like quantitative analysis that we use the term of the investigation or assessment or evaluation. And in fsQCA, we are not going to test hypothesis 0.5 that many of the researchers hate this threshold, these rules, because all of us know that we are dealing with a social complex phenomena that you can't just restrict them with a certain number or certain threshold like 0.5. So it's quite innovative in that sense, and it has different name. If you read articles that they use fsQCA, there are other names or other labels for this analysis that I listed most of them here, most popular of them. It used as a case-oriented analysis or cross-case analysis. I use configurational modeling approach or asymmetrical modeling approach, and I will explain why I use these terms for this application. And in terms of the history and background of this analytical approach, it started in 1987 by politicians, not politicians, researcher from politics, Ragin, and it extended to the business studies 1995 by Rome. It used in organizational research by FIS 2005. Woodside, you know that previous editor of Journal of Business Research, in 2014, he started using and spreading use of this method. And in tourism 2015, I used this approach for the first time. So you have you can see the history of using fsQCA, and it's going to be extended in other research. In hospitality now extended. I'm doing some work with Babak that we are applying this in hospitality research, in information technology research. Also, this method is going to be is using, and is getting more popular day by day. But fsQCA is a method that is under umbrella of QCA. So QCA is the main analysis, stand for qualitative comparative analysis. It's good to know that what are the other methods along with fsQCA that can be considered as configurational modeling or can be used as asymmetrical modeling. So we have 4 types of the analysis that all of them can be classified as a QCA analysis or qualitative comparative analysis. I'm going to start from the left, CS, which is crisp set QCA, that you will use it when you are going to use binary variables. For example, if the outcome of your factor is just a binary variable like yes or no, or visit or not visit, or you want to make this decision or not making this decision. So you will use crisp set QCA. If you are going to deal with some categorical data, like nominal data, like you want to explore the recipes that lead to selection of different brands, brand A, brand B, brand brand C. So you can use multi-values QCA. If you are using some scale data, like GDP, performance, we are using it for satisfaction and loyalty, although they might be considered as some ordinal data. But if you have a large sample size, you can use fsQCA for scale data as well, or nominal, ordinal data as well. Another analysis is necessity analysis. This is quite interesting, specifically for practitioners, because all analysis, including traditional analysis like regression, SEM, fsQCA, CSQCA, and MVQCA, these all talk about the sufficient condition to achieve the outcome. I will explain more about this sufficiency and necessity in upcoming slides with tangible examples. Just to explain that necessity are those conditions that if you drop those conditions from the model, is less likely you achieve that outcome. So I will explain this more, But it's important to know that we can define necessity in two categories: necessity in kind and necessity in degree. So necessity in degree means that to what extent this factor is necessary. And necessity in kinds refers to the factors that basically you need this factor to investigate or know. Or as a manager, you need to include this factor, a specific element in your calculation or no. Basically, we can use a necessity in kind using software of the fsQCA that I will explain in this presentation. So I thought that it's a lunchtime. I start with the example of food to explain the difference between traditional approach and fsQCA and analysis of necessity. So you see that this is a fish which seems to me very tasty meal. If I want to link this tasty meal with the traditional analysis, I would say that traditional approach would inform you that what are the ingredients of this food. As you can see, it's cucumber, of course, fish is the main ingredient, strawberry, lemon, lettuce. So these are the ingredients. And traditional approach lets you know that these ingredients are important and you need to have these ingredients to cook this tasty food. But by using traditional approach, we just know the ingredients, the items that we need. We don't know how we need to mix these items to have such tasty food. So fsQCA let us know the recipe, how we can cook this tasty food. And you know, there are lots of recipes to cook a fish, to have a seafood. And fsQCA is going to explore different recipes that lead to a tasty food. So I think that is an example of differentiation between traditional approach and fsQCA. And necessity analysis informed that what ingredients is necessary. If you drop that item, you can't claim that you have a seafood. So obviously in this food, as you can see, fish might be a necessary factor here. So without fish, with cucumber, with lemon, you can't say that you have a tasty seafood. Yeah, but obviously you can drop cucumber, strawberry from the dish, and still you can claim that this is going to be a tasty food. So this also example to differentiate sufficient factor or necessary factor. But lunchtime is over. Let me take example from research that we have done recently in the Journal of Business Research with Babak. We studied brand love from perspective of the users, online users. And from the literature, we understand that active participation and passive participation could impact brand love. So high level of the active participation lead to high level of brand love. And if the passive participation is high, it's less likely that they love the brand because they are passive. So you see, now we just understand the ingredients: active participation, passive participation. We don't know how the combination of the active participation and passive participation in a social media platform would lead to increase of the brand love. So we use fsQCA to find the recipe, and we came up with two recipes. We found that if users have active participation and passive participation, still they are going to love the brand. And we have another recipe that tells if they are active participant, if you have active participant in your social media platform, although they are passive or they are not very active, still they are going to love your brand. So high level of the passive participation does not indication of the lack of the brand love, or it's not like that. If you have low level of the passive participation, your brand is not going to be loved by the users in social media. And interestingly, we found that passive participation is a necessary element in brand love. So don't get upset if your post in social media does not receive lots of likes, comments, retweets, or share. Because passive participation is like that, they just watch. It means that it's get impression, it get attention, it has influence, and still your audiences is going to love your brand or your product, your service. So any question so far? So I'm going to just back to the chat box to see that if there is any question here. So I suppose that I took example from food. Many participants might get hungry. They just want to grab something, a snack. Any question? Any comment? So cool, no question, means that I can continue. It was clear so far. So now you understand what is the difference between traditional approach that talk about the sufficient net effect of the factor or distinct impact of each factor, each ingredient on the outcome. We learned that what is the recipe, which is about sufficient combination of the factors. And we learned that what is a necessity factor, which means that it's less likely you reach that outcome without that necessary factor. So I'm going to go to the next slide. I assume that you might be familiar with the terminology that we use in quantitative analysis or symmetrical modeling. You can see in the left part of the table. We use labels or terms like independent variable, dependent variable. I listed the correspondence terms when we use configurational modeling. I put this table here because in the rest of the presentation, I might use the terminology that's used in configurational modeling, and then you can link them with quantitative analysis or symmetrical modeling that most of you, I assume, are familiar with already. So in symmetrical modeling, like regression, we say independent variable, but in configurational modeling, we say antecedent, ingredients, indicator, sometimes predictor. As in symmetrical modeling, we say dependent variable. In configurational modeling or fsQCA, we say outcome. In symmetrical modeling, we say measurement, which refers to your data, your scales. In configuration modeling, we talk about calibration. So I might explain what does it mean, calibration. In symmetrical modeling, we have correlation matrix. In configuration modeling, we have truth table. Truth table explain all possible conditions that lead to expected outcome. In symmetrical modeling, we say net effect, which is, you might imagine, you could say impact, you could say positive impact of X on Y, or significant impact of X on Y. But in configurational modeling, we call it as a causal recipe, models, algorithms, or solution. So different name or label we use in configurational modeling to explain the output of the fsQCA. If you see coverage in configurational modeling, this is equal to coefficient of the determination, R square, in quantitative research. If you see consistency, this is equal to correlation coefficient R. And in symmetrical modeling, we normally draw the factor using a square, oval, or circle. But in configurational modeling, we use Venn diagram. And there is a software that helps you to draw Venn diagram. I normally use PowerPoint to draw my Venn diagram, but there is a specific package in R. If you are familiar with R and programming, you can simply use to draw your model, your configurational model. So this star should be read as and I will explain why we have and negation in configurational modeling next slides. And if you want to read more about this terminology, you can see the sources that I provided below of the table. But we don't have equivalent of this and negation in symmetrical modeling, because in symmetrical modeling, we normally use a statistical approach for modeling, but in configurational modeling, we use mathematical approach or Boolean algebra as a function that we use to calculate the recipes and causal model. So I start with, I'm going to continue with this slide that explains why we use fsQCA. And it's important to convince researchers because there are some resistance to learn new approach because you need to spend time, you need to be passionate about learning new things. You might need some resources to use and apply. So you need different motivations to learn and apply new analytical approach. I explained 5 theoretical motivations and 4 methodological motivations that I'm going to explain one by one in this presentation, starting with theoretical motivation and addressing heterogeneity issues. I'm sure that you observe that most of the research, most of the disciplines, they talk about the heterogeneous results. And it makes sense because social science and management is an area that is changing very fast. The context is different. So the role of the factors might change. So you see in the articles that they are talking about heterogeneity, they say that one factor has a positive impact on the outcome. Another researchers say that this factor has a negative impact on the outcome. So we call this as a heterogeneous role of the factors. That usually we in a traditional approach, we simply just justify it and link it with the context. We don't use any methodological approach to explain this heterogeneity. But fsQCA help us to explain the heterogeneous results. For example, one of my recent studies shows that medical cost, tourism cost, is not a negative indicator of behavioral intentions of the travelers. So if you read the literature, all of them mention, most of them mention that the cost has a negative impact on the behaviors of the consumers. But the results of the research shows that there are people, like 70% of the population, they believe that the cost is not a negative indicator of the behavioral intention. And fsQCA help us to explore recipes for this group of the people. So although we appreciate the view of the dominant population, which is like 70% of the population, still we are suggesting solutions, recipe for those that might have other opinions in your sample. So we don't expect that all people should behave, think, and make decisions in a similar pattern. So a traditional approach like regression, SEM, PLS-SEM, they tend to just generalize the results for the whole population. But fsQCA is going to capture the view of the key patterns of the behaviors from the sample of the studies, which might be very important, specifically for studies like medical studies, that a view of the group of the people might be very important due to the importance of the research studies. So another theoretical motivation is fsQCA help us to understand outcome negation. So for the time being, please ignore the right side of the slide. I'm not going to get in the details of explanation of set theoretic method or the logical behind of the Boolean algebra, but I just provided here to just show that why we mean by set theoretic method. I'm going to use a tangible example rather explaining these diagrams. So I'm going to take example from the management studies. Under which condition, if you are a manager, you can increase the performance of your company. So if you look at the literature, it says that you can increase reward, or you can put in place a very effective rewarding system, or you can increase the salary. Then this would be a signal for your employees to work harder, and then their performance would increase. So this is very simple. And you know that if you increase reward and salary at the same time, this is going to be a success recipe, a good recipe to increase performance. So normally in a traditional approach, we just talk about the models that lead to high performance. What about the recipes? What about the conditions that lead to low performance? So traditionally, we just simply consider the model that lead to the low performance as a mirror opposite of the models that lead to high performance. For example, if you look at the number 1, it says that low reward, low salary lead to the low performance. But in real world, the situation might be different. If you keep the salary same, or you increase the salary, but you decrease the reward, still this condition might lead to low performance. Or if you improve your rewarding system, but your salary increase, you might get disappointed and your performance might be decreased. So you see, we have 3 recipes, and 2 last recipes are unique and are not simply mirror opposite of the recipe for high level of the performance. So I'm going to take another example, a more tangible example, to explain outcome negation. So we have this webinar, and we have a number of participants, and under the conditions that I just simply illustrate, you decided to participate in this webinar, and now you are in the same room with me. Yeah. So what are the key ingredients that all put together to have you here? One is that you are passionate to learn something new. You are interested to learn new method. You are available at this time, and you might want to see a new face from University of Sheffield. Yep. So this is a recipe that lead you to be here and participate in this webinar. So traditionally, you might say that if obviously many of your fellow didn't attend, so what could be the reason? The reason might be they are not interested to learn something new, or they were not available, or they didn't want to see new face. So this is quite simple because normally those who use a traditional approach, they think like this. They might say that, yeah, the recipe could be quite mirror opposite of the recipe for your participation. But in reality, the situation might be different. Some of you might not feel that you need to learn new approach. You are a well-established researcher, you are at the end of your career, you are about to retire, or you are a PhD student, you already done your analysis and you are thinking about your defense. So you are not interested at this stage to learn new method. So that's why still, although you have time, although you want to expand your network, see new faces, but you didn't attend. So you see, this is totally different than the first recipe that lead to outcome negation, which is not participating in this webinar. Or there might be a group of the people, they are interested to learn new method, new things. They were available, but they might not like this face to listen or watch. So this group of the people might not attend, or obviously they didn't attend in this meeting. So you can come up with the numerous possible conditions that eventually lead to not participation in this webinar. That's why we use fsQCA to understand recipes that lead to the outcome negation. And this is the world that we are living is not that simple that you think that the conditions that lead to the negation outcome is simply mirror opposite of the conditions that lead to the expected outcome. So is that clear? Any question? So is that something interesting to you? Can you link this with your research? If you want me to take more examples, just let me know. So it seems that, yeah, all good here. Okay. So use this as a green line to continue. So we talk about 2 theoretical motivations so far. We have 5 theoretical motivation to use fsQCA. I would like you to remember this example that I might refer in the next slides. Another theoretical motivation for using fsQCA is a powerful method to tackle the complex phenomena. We just discussed that all factors might not have the same role in your studies. Some factors might be necessary, some factors might be sufficient. Remember that seafood, fish is necessary and sufficient. So cucumber might not be necessary, but could be sufficient. Lemon might be necessary, but insufficient because you need to have fish. So fsQCA help us to explain or identify the role of the factors in terms of the necessity and sufficiency. So I'm going to take example. For example, in condition 1, if you increase the salary, the performance of employee would increase. So then you could say that salary is necessary and sufficient. So if you just increase the salary, performance would increase. Very simple. In the second model, the recipe is that you need to improve reward and increase salary. So if you look at the right side, it gives you guideline how to read these conditions. So star read as and, positive as or, and that sign is a negation, which means that low level of that factor. So recipe 3, so I didn't explain recipe 2 completely. So recipe 2 says that reward and salary lead to performance. So in recipe 2, salary is necessary. You should have increase of salary, but it's not sufficient because you need still to work on your reward system. So you see that the role of the salary in the second recipe is different than role of the salary in the first recipe. Yeah. So this might be because of the context, the organization that you are working, or maybe because of the structure of the company or perception of the employee or organizational culture or climate. So for any reason, the role of the factors might be different. That's why we think that the fsQCA helped to tackle the complexity and modeling the behaviors of the organizations or the phenomena with different factors, with different characteristics. So if you look at the recipe 3, you see that reward or salary lead to the performance. So it doesn't, reward is not necessary here, yeah? So either if you increase salary or reward, you would have performance. And then you could say that salary is sufficient, but not necessary. If you drop salary, still your reward system is going to improve the performance. The last one, which is a bit complicated, but help you to read output of fsQCA, is that reward and salary or training and empowerment lead to the performance. So you have two recipes here. Either you could improve reward and salary. So if you are a manager, you have two options here. If I improve my reward system and increase the salary, I could have increase of the performance, or I might invest on training and empowerment of the employees to increase their performance. So in recipe 4, salary is neither sufficient nor necessary. Why is that? Because you have another recipe, which is training and empowerment, that could increase the performance. So if you drop the salary, still you could increase the performance because you have another recipe, which is training and empowerment. So does that make sense, guys? Any questions so far?
Questions, ladies and gents?
So no question, cool. The fourth motivation, theoretical motivation for using fsQCA is ability of this analytical approach to explore different recipes, algorithms, solutions. So if you remember in the beginning of the session, we mentioned that we can use these different labels for the output of the fsQCA. So this is quite interesting and exciting about fsQCA because it's going to capture the view of the people with different perceptions, different behaviors, different attitudes, and it's going to suggest model or recipe or solutions for different group of the people or different situation, different conditions that you have. For example, one of the studies which talk about the support of the tourism development by residents. You might imagine that if you are doing such research, the context might be quite complex. So some group of the people might trust in government to follow their plan, or some people might not trust to the government, or some people might feel they have power to make an impact. Some people might feel that they don't have power to make an impact on the tourism development at their region. So fsQCA help us to explore models for each group of the people that explain different conditions leading to the expected outcome. So this is a kind of examples that shows that how fsQCA offering alternative solutions or recipes to achieve expected outcome. The last motivation of fsQCA, theoretical motivation for fsQCA, is that it helps you to model outcome configuration. Outcome configuration means that a combination of the two factors, two outcomes. For example, in this study, satisfaction and loyalty is the outcome of your model. So this is very interesting to also to the practitioners, and it could create, generate new knowledge to know that how we can achieve satisfaction and loyalty among our consumers at the same time. Because you might know that if not all satisfied consumers are loyal. So if you have a group of the consumers that, although they are so satisfied, but they might not be loyal people. And as a business, eventually the loyalty is very important to you. And you want to ensure that your customers are satisfied and loyal at the same time. So fsQCA help us to come up with the recipes, with the models that explain solutions that at the same time you can increase satisfaction and loyalty of the consumer. So that could be quite interesting to many of the research in business studies. For example, if you are thinking about brand equity at the same time performance, so two important outcomes at the same time. So you can use fsQCA to explore the recipes for the combination of the outcome. So that might save lots of resources for the managers to not just simply invest on the satisfaction of the consumers, while 50% of the satisfied consumers might not be loyal consumers. So by these results, for example, you see 4 models explain conditions that lead to the satisfaction and loyalty at the same time. So then you can follow these recipes. You don't need to just simply follow the recipes for satisfaction or for one outcome. So we almost covered 5 theoretical motivations to use fsQCA. In other words, we believe that fsQCA could generate new knowledge, and we have 5 reasoning. If you are using fsQCA, you might address these 5 reasons to justify your theoretical contribution by using new technique. So I'm going to stop here to see that whether you have any question about theoretical motivations, and then I will follow it and methodological motivations. Yeah, that is a very good question, Olainka. I'm going to respond to your question shortly, because your question is related to the methods, and I'm going to talk about the methodological motivations for using fsQCA. So you will have your answer shortly. Okay, thank you. Any other question? Great. Okay, let me talk about the methodological motivation, and I can answer the question about the methods. So as I mentioned, is a bridge between qualitative and quantitative analysis. This is a research design that I use in one of my research. And as you can see, till step 5 on the left side, all is about the quantitative research. So usually those use traditional approach like SEM go through the same process. But from stage 6 onward is about qualitative comparative analysis, fsQCA, and the outcome is look like more qualitative results when we talk about the recipes. So most of you know that each method has advantage and disadvantage. There are lots of criticism around quantitative methods. Same for qualitative methods, difficulties with quality criteria measures like reliability, validity, generalizability. But this method helps us to use advantages of both methods at the same time and maximize the strength of both methods and come up with the meaningful results, specifically for complex phenomena, and specifically for behavioral research, people with different behaviors and attitudes and thinking. So really we need a method that could bridge the gap between qualitative and quantitative approach. So if you're seeking for a method that that include the strengths of both approach, I would suggest to use fsQCA, because you could use quantitative data, you could check quality criteria like reliability, validity, generalizability, and you can transform the quantitative data to qualitative output using fsQCA. So second methodological motivation is that fsQCA embraces multicollinearity issues. I'm sure that you know multicollinearity is important in regression analysis when you want to investigate the impact of predictors or independent variables on the dependent variables. So traditional approach, researchers that use quantitative approach like SEM regression, they mainly interested in the net effect or distinct effect of the factors like social dimension, environmental dimension, economic dimension, and satisfaction and loyalty of the consumers. While at the same time, familiarity. So we are interested in the net effect or distinct effect. And the assumption of the many of the analysis, like regression analysis, structural Gaussian modeling, is that you shouldn't have any conflation or mixture or multicollinearity across these predictors. But in reality, this study is about sustainability. And in sustainability, we need to think in a comprehensive fashion. We need to consider the role of social, environmental, and economic elements to ensure that we are considering sustainability dimensions at the same time as a holistic approach. So fsQCA does not appreciate having a multicollinearity across the predictor as a barrier. Not only it does not consider this as a barrier, but also it embraces multicollinearity because it's going to explore the combinational effect of this factor. So really, we are not interested in separation of the impact of each factor. We are interested in combinational effect of each factor. So with this realization, multicollinearity is not an issue, it's not a concern. So why is it important? Because, as I mentioned, due to the nature of the phenomena, many of the predictors, many of the independent variables might be interrelated, highly interrelated, that you need to look at the combinational effect. So fsQCA come up with a solution for this, and it gives you models that basically is a combinational effect, not distinct effect, not net effect. So that is very important because I know some researchers that they stuck with multicollinearity issues. I remember that I was editor of Journal of Service Industries. One of the authors have difficulties with multicollinearity issues, and I remember that the editor and I decided to not encourage them to continue if they want to just simply use structural equation modeling and regression if they have multicollinearity issues, because multicollinearity issues is one criteria or assumption for using such approach. But if they want to use fsQCA, the configurational modeling, that is not an issue. So they can continue their research. They can come up with they still can continue modeling of that phenomena, although they have multicollinearity issue in their model. So this is a question that you ask about sample size. This is very important advantage of fsQCA. It works for small, medium, and large sample size. And I tried to provide evidence for you here that we could successfully get published our research with small sample size data in quality publications. With just 32 cases, we could get our paper published in a 3S journal, International Journal of Contemporary Hospitality Management. With a medium size, like 130, I published in Journal of Travel Research. I published with Babak with quite large sample size. If you consider 300, 400 as a large sample size, you could use a larger sample size like 2,000, 1,000 if you like. But these are the samples or evidence that shows that you could run the model using a small sample size, too large sample size using fsQCA. And this is very important for those who use qualitative approach, because if number of your interviews is small, if you could manage your studies in a way to have a structure and collect some data that can be quantified somehow, you can run fsQCA with a small sample size and do a configuration modeling in your research. So I'm not sure that I answer your question. Just I'm going to back to you to make sure that I answer your question. If not, okay, great. So we talk about three methodological motivation. I hope that till now I could convince you how fsQCA could be helpful in your research. The last methodological motivation that I'm going to to discuss is involving contrarian cases in your research. This is much linked to heterogeneity issues that we discussed in theoretical motivation. And it depends to your studies and your context that how these contrarian cases, those marginal group or minority group, their role, their views is important in your research. But I could imagine that if you are studying on minority group, that minority view of the minority group is important. Definitely fsQCA could help you to capture the view of the minority because it involves contrarian cases in the modeling. It would suggest a recipe for minority group. As you know, traditional approach is just represent the view of the majority, not minority, because the expectation is to generalization of the results. So you will ignore the minority group. Or if you are doing research about luxury marketing, that even a small number of the consumers are important. You are not dealing with the mass consumers, mass in terms of number of the consumers. It's a niche area, but still the view of the people are very important for your research. Or you are doing some research about medical services. Basically, it's a very critical issue because you are studying about lives of the people, and it's a matter of death and life. So a small sample size also, although their view is not in line with the majority of your sample, still they are important, and we need to study and model their behaviors, their attitudes, their perceptions. Or maybe you are working on social studies that you have some influential group, pressure group, that they have significant impact in the process, in the management process. So still their view is very important, although they might be a handful of a number of the cases in your sample, but still their view they might have outweighed the view of the others. So that's why you need to involve their view and understand how they think and how they are going to react. So it's very important to not ignore the view of the contrarian cases. So you can link this with your research and see that whether the contrarian cases views are important in your research or not. If they are important, fsQCA could help you to model their view as well. So I'm going to talk about the software. This might be, I assume this might be, no, I've got one more slide. But if you feel that this is a helpful analytical approach, I could tell you that it includes 3 stages. That first you need to calibrate your data from quantitative data to fuzzy set data. And then using the software like fsQCA software that I'm going to explain other softwares shortly, you can calculate different possible conditions, all possible conditions that lead to your expected outcome. So you can calculate all possible conditions and have it as a truth table. And then using counterfactual analysis, you can refine all possible conditions and select those conditions that consistently and sufficiently lead to the expected outcome. So this is a 3-stage of fsQCA generally. And if you are interested, Bob can arrange another sessions that we can do some empirical practices to run this type of the modeling. But if you want to learn by yourself, there are softwares that are listed here. You can see that there are a number of the softwares that most of them are open source. It means that you don't need to pay to use these softwares. And if you know programming and you are familiar with R, there are different packages, R packages that you can use to run configurational qualitative comparative analysis. But every method has disadvantage and limitations. So key limitations of this method is it ignores data error in estimation. So this might be similar to the regression analysis. The first two limitations that I listed in one of my research in the right side of the table, you can see the limitations. We talk about the benefits, but I'm going to talk about the limitations at this slide. So like regression analysis using SPSS, it's not like PLS-SEM or SEM, MOS that include data error in the estimation because it includes observed variable in the model. So those who use a structural equation modeling, they are proud of inclusion of the error and also observed variable. But basically in fsQCA and regression analysis using SPSS, because we just deal with latent variable, that we simply calculated the average or composite score of the observed variable. We eliminated errors and we reduced the number of the factors from observed variable to latent variable. So this is the two limitations of this method. And those, as I mentioned, SEM, those who use SEM, they believe that if you include error and observed variable in the model, it's most likely you get more accurate results because you provided more data, more information in the model to be processed and give you the outcome. Another limitation of fsQCA is that it requires in-depth knowledge in one of the steps of the fsQCA, the last step of the fsQCA, which is counterfactual analysis. When you want to refine all possible conditions from truth table, you should be expert and you should have good knowledge and understanding, not only about the area of the studies, but also about the context of the studies. So you should know the theory, you should know the literature, you should know the context of your study. Is it organization? Is it a business firms? Is it a destination or society level or country level? So you need to be expert both in knowledge and also the context of your research, which is not easy. In most of the cases, it's not possible that all of us know everything. But if you have a good team of the researchers, some of the researchers might be knowledgeable, some of the researchers might be familiar with the context. So you need to discuss all possible conditions provided by truth table to be able to refine the recipes. And another big limitation of fsQCA is that it is not able to test the model that involve mediation factor. So it doesn't, still we need more technological advancement, specifically with the software development, to be able to test models that include mediation factor. And this is very important because in our research, we always are interested to understand the process of processes that lead to expected outcome. So in mediation, you are interested to understand the flow or the logic behind of the model that lead to your expected outcome. So I think that I covered the most important point that I would like to raise in this webinar. And I'm happy to take your question, any question that you would have about this method, and also specifically methodological motivations and theoretical motivations.
Any questions, ladies and gents? Questions, comments? Any of you going to use this method? Dr. Olya sold this technique to you very well today. Is a good marketer.
I tried, but it seemed that they might need some time to reflect and link this method with their studies.
It is a bit heavy, and also you need to have a good knowledge on basic statistical techniques like regression, factor analysis, t-test, before you, and also knowing about the structural model actually before understanding fsQCA is good. There's some questions here. No, it was just more. Thank you. Right.
Yeah, thank you, Katie.
So
yeah, we have Olyankov that is going to use this in behavioral finance research. That is quite interesting. That might be an area that we have not many research that use fsQCA, and this is a good chance, guys, to use methods, new methods or powerful methods to be able to publish your work, produce quality output. So I myself, when I use this method, I could publish a lot in quality journals. So I know the value of using new methods in my research. It might change the career and your career development totally. So it's worth learning new approach, not just emphasizing on fsQCA, in any other methods that you see. Sometimes you can learn from the other disciplines and use the methods that they are using. Always challenge yourself. And that's why we believe in multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. So I think we have a question here from Katie. So that's a very good question, Katie. In politics, if you remember my slides about the history in politics, we have most of the research from the other disciplines. We have in politics, in organizational research, in marketing, in tourism and hospitality is growing very fast using application of these methods. In management studies, I have a slide that I'm going to I can't remember now, but I can check from my files. I've got a presentation about this method in 2017 when I work in South Korea, but I remember that I have a slide here that explains that which area need to be studied more. So you can see in the left diagram, you can see that there are areas, as I just mentioned, in finance, information system, public management, production and operation, operational research. These are the areas that fsQCA used. There are less research that use fsQCA. And if you want to understand the scale of the data, you can see there are most of the research investigate organizational and individual data. So if you are working on a country level, a state level, at larger scale, obviously, you have more chance to sell this method. So I hope that this answers your question, Katie.
Any more questions? Just one more question from me. Can you use this method for comparing data, for example, cross-country analysis? Is that possible to use this method?
Yeah, exactly. That is the area that there is a gap. And if you remember in the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that this one of the label that used for this method is cross-country, cross-cases analysis, which means that you can compare the cases together. And this is the area that I really recommend to do research, and you would have a high level of chance to publish in good journals if you have big data for country level data.
Good. Thank you very much. There's one more question. It wasn't a question.
So Candice said that thanks for the presentation. My research is related to investor expectation on energy issues and is more qualitative in nature. The small sample size, I was wondering if this would be appropriate in my case, even if there is a lack of the quantitative data. That's a very good question, Candice. Basically, as I mentioned, this is a method that could use qualitative research, basically, but at some point you need to quantify your data. And that would be simple because it depends to your research design, but if you decide that what is your outcome, and if you are looking for a logic or a kind of impact of some variables on formulating your outcome, you can design a kind of model. And then by asking questions, as I mentioned, this method also can use categorical data, nominal data, binary variables. If your outcome is binary, is just like yes or no, or even it's about religion, which is nominal, or it's about the energy. If you want to encourage people to see that whether they adopt to a new energy and the outcome is yes or no, still you can use this approach, but you need to think and discuss this with your supervisors to see how you can quantify at some point your data and your story. But that is doable if you like. And this is sometimes this is a solution for many PGRs. I know I've got one of my PhD students that stuck with loads of the information from the interview, and but she couldn't find a solution to move forward. And we had a session, and we could somehow extract some patterns, some factors that have influence on the expected outcome, and we will be able to quantify the factors that could affect the outcome, and we come up with some tangible outputs, which is very important in qualitative research. That always is not easy to showcase the output, the results of the analysis. But fsQCA could help you to come up with some tables, numbers, that make life easier for you to defend your work from the view of the examiner.
Great. Any more questions, ladies and gents? Yeah. Oh.
So that is another question. That is very interesting question. Can the outcome be hypothesized when converting to quantitative? So let me talk about the hypothesis development. As I mentioned, that in fsQCA, we are not interested to hypothesize everything. Yeah, it's not like quantitative analysis, like other quantitative, like regression and SEM, that we start with hypothesis. No, no hypothesis. That's why we believe that this is a kind of qualitative approach, that we explore the methods, the models. So no hypothesis, but recently Babak and I, we are doing one research that we are using propositions to explain what are the assumptions that we are going to analyze. But specifically about your question is that you are asking that that the outcome be hypothesized when converting the quantitative. Could you come in and explain this, because it's not clear the question to me, and I don't want to answer your question in the wrong way. If it's possible, or you can explain more in the chat, whichever you prefer. Thanks, Chris, for your participation.
Yes, this is me.
Yep, go ahead, please.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier about hypotheses, and you also mentioned that at some point, you need qualitative variables, and then to be able to quantify that at the end of the day. But I was just wondering whether hypotheses would come in, given that at some point there would be quantitative, analysis.
Yeah, I mentioned that this is the bridge between quantitative and qualitative analysis, and the input of the softwares that you want to run fsQCA, it asks for some kind of data which more quantitative, although it works with categorical data, binary variables, and nominal data. So still you can use those type of the factors, but if you want to have a rich outcome, I would suggest to somehow quantify your data as an input of the model. Okay, and the model helps you to change this quantitative data, specifically change from the crisp set data to calibrated data, which is called fuzzy set data, and then the software use those fuzzy set data and give you some recipes that you can explain in a qualitative fashion.
Okay.
So I hope that we could have a kind of session that we can practice this empirically using softwares to showcase that how this transformation of the data will happen. But basically, we start with some quantitative data. This data could be, as I mentioned, it could be binary data, 0, 1, yes, no, or it could be nominal data. It could be like the name of or type of the energy that you are using in your research, or type of the company or name of the company's energy service providers. And it could be some scale data, like the level of the energy, the price of the energy that they use. So all this type of the data can be used in modeling when you use fsQCA.
Thank
so
you.
I hope that, yep.
Yes,
is that clear?
Indeed. Thank you.
Good. Any more questions? Comments? Great. Right. I just would like to thank you, Dr. Olya, for today's session. It was very good starting, sort of giving some flavors of the what is the qualitative comparative analysis. It needs some practices and it needs a longer session to understand the principle and how you could apply this interesting approach in practice. So we could arrange some more practical, like a workshop for a day or two later on, if there is a big demand for this method in the school. So again, thanks very much. Sorry.
Last point about your point, Babak, is that sometimes learning new methods due to the sophistication of the approach, it takes time. And I understand, I myself, because I learned this approach by myself, I know that you need, when you learn and read new things, you need some time to digest and reflect and link your research with new methods. So I understand totally that most of the participants, they are reflecting, they need some time to be able to, and read more, of course, to be able to use this approach in their research. And thank you very much for your invitation. It's a great pleasure to present my work in this interesting webinar. And I would like to meet you sometimes, either in Sheffield or in Heriotbat.
Thanks very much. And guys, have a lovely day.
Thank you very much. Bye.